Today I would be discussing on few Pentaho Data Integration steps which would help us with scripting and dynamic transformation. The first step that I would be discussing is using execute SQL Step, and the next one is modified JavaScript, and the next one is Java expression, and the other one is regular expression. And we would conclude this topic with the last step, that is execute using a shell script step. Before we go into the examples and the use case, I just want to give you a brief introduction. I am on Ubuntu 12 and I'm using Pentaho Data Integration 4.3 version. So this is how the Pentaho Data Integration tool, graphical interface tool looks, which is called Spoon. And I would be demonstrating all my examples and use case using either job or transformation. This is how we create a job or transformation. From the file button, select the job to create a job, which opens this. This is the work area where I can drag in all the steps that I need to complete my business case. So for example, if I need to select a particular step, I can go in and select on this and drag that into my work area, or I could just even select using this space to search. Say if I want to use an SQL step, I just click SQL on this and I say enter. It gives me where this step is available. So I can just pull that into my work area and use that. So this is just a quick background on how I have created all my examples. So now let's start on with our first example. The first example is using SQL Step. So this is scripting using SQL editor Pentaho Data Integration Step. This is how the step looks. This is the step. So the business case for this transformation is I'm supposed to create a table with the name sales rep employee. So before I create a table, I would like to test whether the table exists in the database or no. If the table doesn't exist in the database, then I create the table. If it exists, then I drop the table and recreate the table. Now let's see step by step how we achieve this. So this is a job and this is my work area where I have already created this example. So this is just the start, which indicates the start of any job. And the second step is this step helps me to check if the table exists in the database or no. So when I double click on this step, this window opens where I'm supposed to give a job name. Define a descriptive name as to what a step is doing. So in this case, I'm checking a table with this name. So I say check sales rep employee exists. So where do I want this table? I want to check that in a database. So I need to define the database connection here. So I can go in, click on the new to set up a new database connection. I click on this and then specify the connection name, host name, the database that I am using. It could be Oracle, MySQL, or any database that I am using. And then I specify all the required credentials like port number, username, and password. I could even test my database connection, whether it works or not. Let me show you the one that's already been created. This is the one that I'm using. So I specified my connection name, my host name, what my database name is, and the port number, and the username and password. The database that I'm working on is a MySQL database. So I can click on test button to see whether the connection was successful. Yes, in this case it was successful, all good to go, so I close this. So this is the database where I want to check whether this table exists or no. So this is how, and then here is where I specify the table name. So this is the database name, database connection name, and this is the table name which I want to check. So all good. So now we know we are checking in webinar OLTP database for the connection for the table name sales rep employee. You can see there are two hops or two output lines that are going to two different steps. One which is highlighted in green, the other one highlighted in red. The green one indicates when it is successful. The other one indicates when it was not successful or when it was false. So if the table exists, then it goes through the red path. And if the table was not, if there was a table, then it goes to this path. So what I'm doing here in my next step is I'm using an execute SQL script step to drop the table if it exists. So I would drop the table if it exists in the database. So as I said, my business case is to check the table if it exists. If it exists, I'm supposed to drop the table and recreate the table in the database. So first I would check the table if it exists using this step, and then if it exists, then I want to drop my table. So because this was true, I go to this SQL step and drop this table. So in my execute SQL script, this step allows us to write any SQL script. For example, in this step, I'm writing a script to drop a table. So drop table sales rep employee. So after I do this, I want to recreate the table. So I'm using another execute SQL script step to create this table. So I say create table with this name. I'm using a select statement to create this table. So what I'm specifying is select star from employees where the job title is sales rep. So now let's run this transformation. Let's run this job and see what we get. So I'm running this job. So it was successful. So now let's go back to the database and see whether this table was created or not. So this is my database. So I go here and just click on Explore button. And then I click on this. And then I click on my tables to find the table. So this was the table that I created. So I can just preview quickly a few records from the table. So all good. We created the table and loaded the data into that table. So this was one way of using the SQL script step. The next example where we would learn more advanced tricks to use in this step. So the second example is also using the same step, SQL editor step. In this second example, the business case is to get the distinct values, distinct country values from office table. So if we on this, I get 5 distinct country values. So what I'm supposed to do is, I'm supposed to get the distinct values from my office table, and then I'm supposed to create distinct tables after every country name. So for example, if I got Australia, USA, UK, all these countries from my office table, then I'm supposed to create unique tables for all of this. For example, I'm supposed to create a table with office underscore USA, office underscore Australia, and office underscore whatever the distinct country name was. So that's the first scenario. The second thing is I'm supposed to create these tables and I'm supposed to load data from my office table with that respective country into that table. So for example, the Australia office underscore Australia table will only have the records where the country is equal to Australia. So let's see how we can achieve that. So I'm using a table input step because I want to read distinct values from this table. So I want to read distinct country values from this table, office table. So I need to specify the database connection. This is similar to what we discussed in the previous example. We have to set up the database connection. So this is how we set up the database connection. we test the database connection, all good, then we can write the SQL script here, or we can even get the SQL statement using this button. I can click on this, go into my database, tables, and select the table that I want to use. And then if I click on this, it would ask me if I want to get all the field names. I can say yes, and then that will fetch me all the field names. Look, this is how it fetches me. I could even do this, or I could even write the SQL. So the second, calculator step. So as I explained, the way I want my table name to be is, I want it to be office underscore the country name. So I want it to be office underscore Australia, but I don't get that from my input. So what I get is only the country name. So I'm using a calculator step to get that format of the table name. So what I'm doing here is, I'm using this calculator step. The first one that I'm doing here is, I'm setting a value because I want my table name to be office underscore then the country name. So I want to use office underscore as a constant value. So I use this new field called office. Then I set a constant value. Set field to a constant value is the calculation type that I select from my list, and then I specify what my variable is. In this case, my variable is office underscore. So I'm concatenating that, or I'm adding that variable office underscore with the country name that I get from my input. So what I'm doing here is, I have the country table name. I've defined the variable as country table name, and I'm just doing A plus B, which is nothing but office, that's office underscore, and country is any distinct value that comes from my table. That could be Australia, USA, UK, or anything. So that is what I'm doing in this calculator step. The next is a select value step. I'm just using this to get rid of the unnecessary columns that I would not be using. So in this case, I don't use my country name that is coming from the source. So I've just got rid of that column. The next step is, I'm using an SQL, this execute SQL statement step, like what we used in the previous example. So if you look at this script that I have in this, it has a question mark. So what I'm doing here is, I'm parameterizing it. I'm passing arguments to my script. So if you look down, I have checked these two. One is execute for each row. What I'm basically doing is, I want this particular SQL statement to be executed for every input row. So in this case, if I'm getting 5 input rows, I want this drop table if exists command to execute 5 times. So I say execute for each row. And the other one is, as I mentioned, I'm using a question mark, which indicates I'm passing arguments or variables. So I just click this one, variable substitution. So I am substituting the variables. So one thing that we should be careful while we are defining, while we are passing these arguments is, the way we define the arguments here, the order of the arguments that we define here should be same as we call them in the script. Say for example, if I have 2 SQL statements which uses 2 different arguments. So the first one uses A and the second one uses B. So I need to specify my arguments in the same order. Don't worry, I have explained the same thing in my next SQL step. I'll just show you that. So what this SQL step basically does is, it just drops the table if it exists, just to make sure that we don't have these tables already in our database. If we have them, I just want to drop them. So before I create them, I want to drop these tables. So that's what is being done in this SQL step. The next one is where we actually create the table and load the specific data into that table. Load the specific data into that table. So what I'm doing here is, like what I mentioned previously was, see, I'm using two variables here. I'm defining two arguments here. One is country table name and the other one is country where clause, what I want to pass in my where clause. So the way I have defined my arguments is the way I'm calling them. So the order of defining arguments should always be same as the order we call the arguments. So in this case, I'm create table. This is my argument that I pass here. So create table, country table name. Select star from office where country is equal to this, for country where. So I have checked all these here. Execute as a single statement because this is all a single SQL statement. So I even checked this. Now let's run this and see whether we create all these tables and what we load into each of them. So I've run, we just finished running. Let's go into our database and see whether these tables were created or not. So I just click on it, explore my database connection, and then go here and then click on my tables. See, I have all my 5 tables created individually for each unique country name. So if I just preview on this and see what data I just have the data where country is equal to Australia. Let's see another table. So I have all the countries where the country name is USA. So that's what this transformation will help us in doing. Okay, so the next one is scripting using JavaScript. Pentaho Data Integration has this JavaScript step which helps us to execute any JavaScript. So I have considered a very simple basic use case or a business case here. What I'm doing in this transformation is I'm just getting the system date and I'm converting that date to a string and string to a number. Very simple example. So I'm using this get system information step to get the system date. So if I preview on this, I would get the system state. So this is what this step would help me. So the next step is my JavaScript. So JavaScript by default has different functions which we could use. So for example, there are different string functions, numeric, date, logic functions, and special functions which are all predefined. We could pretty much use most of these predefined functions. So if I want, say for example, if I want to use any of these predefined functions, I could either double click on it to get that function into my work area, or what I can simply do is I could just drag this function in here, this way of using it. So for my example, what I need to do is I need to convert the system date to a string and string to a number. So I'm using two predefined functions. One is date to string and the other is string to number. I'm defining two variables. Variable one is called sysDateString and the other one is called sysDateSK, which is a numeric value. So what I'm doing here is I'm using this predefined date to string function. I'm passing the variable that is an input, that is nothing but my sysdate. I could pass my inputs by just selecting from here. I could just double click on it. It gets into this work area automatically. So and I'm passing a default date format or the format that I want my date to be in, and then I'm converting that to the string. And then I'm using the string to number function to convert that back into an integer. And if you look at the bottom, I'm getting those variables. So I have two variables defined and I want to get both of them into my output, so I'm getting both of them. Say suppose I don't want to use this string, I don't want to get that variable, then we can just get rid of that from here. I could just use one. So I can just delete that if I don't want that, and if I want just the system date SK. So now the next step is I'm just writing it to a log so that we could all see when we run the transformation. So now let's run the transformation and see in our log the output. So now this is my log. see, this is the system date that I have passed using my get system information, and this is the output that we have got. So this is the numeric value that I've got using the JavaScript. The next example is using Java expression. So now let's see how we can use Java expression to do scripting in Pentaho Data Integration. I'm using the same example but using a different step, that is Java expression step. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting the system date, converting it to a string, and string to an integer. So this is all same what we've seen in our previous step. We're getting the system information and we're just reading the system date. And in my Java expression step, what I'm defining is I'm just specifying a Java expression. I'm just specifying a Java expression where I'm using a simple date format path to convert date to a string, and then I'm using a simple integer pass in function to convert that to an integer. So this is how my function or the expression, Java expression, would look. And then I'm writing it to a log as we did in our previous example. So if I run this, this is what we would get. Let me open my log and show. So this is similar to what we got in the previous example. Now let me explain you the difference between using a JavaScript and using a Java expression. Using a Java expression is very good in terms of its performance when compared to Java expression. Let's do a simple test to test how fast is Java expression in compared to JavaScript. So what I'm doing here is I have a step called generate rows where I'm generating 1,000,000 records just to test my performance. I just want to disable the hop to write to a log because my log would be huge. So just to avoid that, I just want to disable that hop. Let me do the similar thing here. I'm just generating 1,000,000 records just to test performance. Now let's run both the steps. So I'm just saving this transformation and then I run this. Let's see how long this takes to execute. While this is running, let me do same here. Let me save this transformation, which is using the JavaScript, and let me run this as well. So I'm running both the transformation with the same logic but same number of records, but one is using JavaScript, the other one is using Java expression. So the one using JavaScript has taken 9.8 seconds to load 1,000,000 records. Now let's see how about Java expression. The Java expression has just taken 5.3 seconds. So it is always good to use a Java expression because it's good in terms of its performance. Okay, now let's go to the next example. Next example is scripting using another step called regular expression. The business case for this example is I'm reading the employee data from employee table. I have a column email in this table. Let's see how the email looks like. So the email column looks like this. So what my business case is to split this column into two columns, one called name, the other called the organization name. So what I want to have in my name column is the first part, that is before the @ symbol. So I want to read everything till the @ symbol as name, and I want to read everything after that symbol, after the @ symbol, as an organization name. So let's see how we can achieve this using the regular expression, scripting using regular expression. So what I'm doing here is, this is my regular expression step where I need to specify a unique step name value, basically a name that describes what this step is doing. So in my case, I'm splitting this email column. So I specified the field to evaluate. What is my field that I want to evaluate? I can select from this drop down what column I want to use. So in this example, I want to use my email. I can even create fields for capture groups. So in this example, as I explained, I want to capture my first part of the string, that is before the @ as name, and I want to capture the second half of the string after the @ as organization. So I need two groups here. The first group is the name and the second group is organization. So I have ticked this because I want to capture the groups. Now this is my regular expression. This is my regular expression. So this is how I'm grouping it. This is my first group and this is my second group. So I can even test the regular expression. I can click on this, button, test regular expression, and I can pass a simple example here. Say for example, just to test whether my regular expression is correct, I just pass abc @xyz. So this is good. You have observed that the color has changed from red to green, indicating that the regular expression was successful. So this is how we can test the regular expression. So now, because I have two groups, I need to specify two new fields, what my groups are. The first one I want to group that as name, and the second one I want to group that as organization name. So this is how the regular expression is, and next what I'm doing here is I'm just dumping all this data along with these two extra columns into an Excel. Let's run this transformation and see what we get. Good. So now let me open my Excel. So I just want to hide these. This is the email column that I've used to generate these two columns. One is the name, the other is organization name. So if you look, it has read all before the @ as name and all after that as organization name. And the last example is using shell script to do scripting in Pentaho Data Integration tool. So what the business case for this is, I'm just executing a simple command, that's ls-l command on my temporary directory. So what I'm doing here is I'm using this execute shell script step. I've specified a unique name for this shell ls-l on temp directory, what's the perspective or what's the objective of this step. And then I could even browse the script. If the script is available, I could browse and I could find where my script is. I could select that and use that to run. In this case, I just want to write a simple script. So I just say insert script. I want to insert the script. That is, I want to write script. And then I say what my working directory is, where this script gets saved also. So in the script part, I have specified my script as ls-l, and I'm just writing this to a log so that we can observe. So when I run this job, so let me open my log. So this is where the script got saved. It was saved under my active directory. So I gave my directory as temp. So this is the default name. That's the default name for the script, and this is what it gives me as the output. So that's the end of my presentation. Thanks everybody.